The views expressed on the following broadcasts do not necessarily reflect those of KHLT, Take 12 Radio, or our affiliates. The opinions on this show should not be considered as medical, psychological, or professional advice and are those of the host, co-host, and guest. Take 12 Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting are not affiliated with any particular 12-step fellowship.
One day at a time with its failures and fears, with portion of pain and burden of care, we must meet.
Welcome to Walking Through the Language of the Heart, a journey into the Grapevine writings of Alcoholics Anonymous co-founder Bill W. And now, here are your co-hosts, Chris S. and the Monty'man.
Well, there you are, my friends. Welcome aboard to another fine episode of this episode. Another fine broadcast of this episode. Episode number 54 of Walking Through the Language of the Heart with our good friend and Take 12 Recovery Radio contributor, Mr. Chris S. Chris, what's going on, buddy?
Monty, it's good to be on with you tonight. You know, it's been a crazy week, but a great week, and I gotta tell you this. Rarely am I as excited to go over an article more so than tonight. You know how much we both are interested in the 12 steps and history and all that. This is the origin of the 12 steps, July 1953, and I'm really looking forward to going through this. How was your week this week?
It was an excellent week. I have a good friend that says he's too blessed to be stressed. And I don't know how often he says that so he doesn't get stressed out, but I really concur with that this week. We had just an excellent week, and I was reflecting several times this week on last week's show, and with Judy
Wow.
L. And listeners, if you have an opportunity, you really should go back and listen to episode number 53. It is something else. That's all I'll say about that. You just got to listen to it. It was great, especially if you like controversy, and we love controversy.
A high level controversy. You know, Judy's a national treasure. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah.
She's amazing.
So it's been a great week, and just this is the week that we did our special report, Take 12 Recovery Radio special report that we do once a month, and then we have our other shows that we do as well. We had a great show the other day on, I can't even pronounce it, but it's EMDR.
Rapid eye movement.
Therapy. It's the
Yeah.
therapy. We did a show on that. I was blown away. Matt Brown and I interviewed Chrissy Clark from Ripple Ranch in Texas. And so that was amazing. So listeners, if you want to listen to other shows besides this one, just visit us at take12radio.com and click on any of the podcasting platforms listed there, and there you go. So launch us forth here, Chris, on this week, a fragment of history, origin of the 12 steps.
Absolutely. So July 1953, Monty, that was a long time ago.
You know.
Well, I mean that's like when the honeymooners were brand new. I mean, it's a long time ago.
Yeah.
So anyway, let's see what he has to say, because again, you and I don't read these. We want this to be as fresh to us as it is to everyone else. So, I'm looking forward to hearing it. All right. AAs are always asking, where did the 12 steps come from? In the last analysis, perhaps nobody knows. Yet some of the events which led to their formulation are as clear to me as though they took place yesterday. So far as people were concerned, the main channels of inspiration for our steps were three in number: the Oxford Group, Dr. William D. Silkworth of Towns Hospital, and the famed psychologist William James, called by some the father of modern psychology. The story of how these streams of influence were brought together and how they led to the writing of our 12 steps is exciting and in some spots downright incredible. Now, obviously we know about the Oxford Group
Sure.
influence. There's a book out there that's just been republished, Monty. It's called Practice These Principles, and within it is the original publication called What is the Oxford Group? So, this book, What is the Oxford Group, is basically what you would hand somebody when they would walk in to the Oxford Group, just to give them some idea of what the fellowship is about. And in that, some of the titles of the chapters are surrender, restitution, prayer and meditation. Just a number of these chapter titles that lead you right back to Alcoholics Anonymous, sharing for confession and witness. And you can see how Bill took those 12 steps that had a lot of religious verbiage, because it was part of this religious organization, and he kind of revamped them, kind of rewrote them so that they wouldn't sound quite as religious, but the concepts are the same. So I knew that. Now he's also saying William D. Silkworth. Now, what Silkworth, I believe, how he was important was he understood the characteristics of alcoholism. He understood the physical craving. He understood the mental obsession, and he understood powerlessness. He understood that there were people who absolutely were desperate and absolutely wanted to separate from alcohol, and their motives were good, and they were being as honest as possible about it, and they were drunk that afternoon. And he put some philosophical structure around those experiences, and he told Bill what alcoholism was, and having the correct problem, Bill was able to really motivate through the rest of the steps. Now, as far as William James and how he influenced Bill, the Varieties of Religious Experience was the book that blew Bill's mind. Uh, and in it talked about spiritual experiences, obviously. So, experiences that couldn't really be quantified logically. Uh, they were religious conversion experiences, or they were complete transformations, revelatory experiences, and that's what the book was about. So Bill understood from William James the spiritual awakening.
Right.
So you put all these things together. You put the problem together with the steps, together with the spiritual awakening, and I guess that's what Bill is saying is the whole part of the recovery experience. Many of us will remember the Oxford Group as a modern evangelical movement which flourished in the 20s and early 30s. Led by a one-time Lutheran minister, Dr. Frank Buchman, the Oxford groups of that day threw heavy emphasis on personal work, one member with another. AA's 12 Steps had its origin in that vital practice. The moral backbone of the Oxford Group was absolute honesty, absolute purity, absolute unselfishness, and absolute love. They also practiced a type of confession, which they called sharing, the making of amends for harms done to others, called restitution. They believed deeply in their quiet time, a meditation practiced by groups and individuals alike, in which the guidance of God was sought for every detail of living, great and small. That is a powerful powerful paragraph. Now there are people like Dick B. You know who he was, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of people who went back into the history and really dug this stuff up. But this is Bill saying it.
Yeah.
Explaining exactly the practices in the Oxford group that translated into what we hopefully do today. So these basic ideas were not new. They could have been found elsewhere. But the saving thing for us first alcoholics who contacted the Oxford groupers was that they laid great stress on these particular principles. And fortunate for us was the fact that the groupers took special pains not to interfere with one's personal religious views. Their society, like ours later on, saw the need to be strictly non-denominational. That's really the first time I've heard Bill say that the Oxford group was non-denominational.
So let me ask you this. So when I think of non-denominational, I think of denominations within Judeo-Christianity, like Baptist, Nazarene, Protestant, Catholic, that kind of thing, right?
Sure.
Is that what he's saying here? Or is he saying non-denominational means not necessarily Christian? It could be Muslim, it could be Buddhist, it could be anything.
Well, he's saying that they didn't interfere with people's personal religious views.
Yeah.
But Monty, back in the 20s and 30s, a lot of the New Age, a lot of the Eastern, they hadn't shown up yet.
Sure.
So what you had was Christianity.
Yeah.
And you had a tiny sect of Judaism and Muslim, tiny, maybe two Hindu people in the state. So they're really talking about non-denominational, but they're talking about Christian.
Yeah. So it's really probably more, Catholic and Protestant. We're not gonna mix either one of those.
You're probably right. Let's not argue.
Right.
Let's not get in a fist fight with the Catholics if we're a Protestant. In the late summer of 1934, my well-loved alcoholic friend and schoolmate Ebby had fallen in with these good folks and had promptly sobered up. Being an alcoholic and rather on the obstinate side, he hadn't been able to buy all the Oxford Group ideas and attitudes. Nevertheless, he was moved by their deep sincerity and felt mighty grateful for the fact that their ministrations had, for the time being, lifted his obsession to drink. When he arrived in New York in the late fall of 1934, Ebby thought at once of me. On a bleak November day, he rang up. Soon he was looking at me across our kitchen table at 182 Clinton Street, Brooklyn, New York. As I remember that conversation, he constantly used phrases like these. I found I couldn't run my own life. I had to get honest with myself and somebody else. I had to make restitution for the damage I had done. I had to pray to God for guidance and strength, even though I wasn't sure there was any God. And after I'd tried hard to do these things, I found that my craving for alcohol left. Then over and over, Ebby would say something like this. Bill, it isn't a bit like being on the water wagon. You don't have to fight the desire to drink. You get released from it. I never had such a feeling before.
Wow.
That is amazing. So those strict spiritual principles, getting honest with yourself and someone else, restitution for damage, understanding that your life is unmanageable by you, praying for guidance and strength. Those are the core of our steps.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, Monty, which I think is pretty cool. If you look at some of the early stuff in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll see that Bill basically took these steps on the hospital bed while he was detoxing. And then if you move forward, I believe it's the story he sold himself short, but it was someone who went out to Akron to meet up with Dr. Bob. And in that story he says, and Dr. Bob had the afternoon off, so he formally took me through the steps that afternoon. So these principles back in the earlier days, there was an economy to them. Uh, there was more brevity. What you and I do is, we go through the book Alcoholics Anonymous. We bring sponsees over to the house. Tonight we're gonna do step one, and you're gonna take home inventory, and then in the next 2 or 3 months you're gonna finish your inventory, and it's kind of elongated, right?
Yeah.
But in the early days, this was triage, and it was fast, and it was
Very fast.
economical. It was economical.
Yeah.
You didn't have to spend a whole lot of time. So and this is just that paragraph is just one more, example of how that is true.
Do you think that we do the new alcoholic, an injustice by, practicing easy does it and just kind of, well, let's do a step a month. I hear that and I just cringe. Do you think we're cheating them?
It really depends on how much trouble the person is in, who you're working with. If they're really alcoholic, you could be contributing to their relapse and quite possible death by taking too long to get involved. See, a lot of people think you got to get better to do these steps.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is, these steps are what get you better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be like Monty. Let's say you had a broken leg and you went to the hospital, and you got in the waiting room, and you went to the doctor, and the doctor said, okay, this month, we're gonna put a cast on your leg, and next month, we're gonna let you out of the hospital, and the third month, I mean, you wouldn't accept that as sound medical advice. Well, you don't need that chemo. I didn't take chemo. When I had cancer. I mean, it's the same kind of thing. So we have an illness. There's a solution, a treatment for that illness. Let's get about it as soon as we reasonably can. I'm not saying, if somebody doesn't have the capacity to understand simple things, that you try to push them through this really fast, but you can err on the side of taking too much time as well. I truly believe.
Yep, I agree.
You know what I mean? When he arrived in New York in the late fall of 1934, Ebby thought at once of me. Okay, we already read that. Such was the sum of what Ebby had extracted from his Oxford group friends and had transmitted to me that day. While these simple ideas were not new, they certainly hit me like a ton of bricks. Today, we understand just why that was. One alcoholic was talking to another alcoholic like no one else can. And here's another concept. Alcoholics can really gain the trust and understanding of other alcoholics, and he learned that right away. And I think that's important.
This was the very early Me Too movement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The early Big Brother movement.
Yeah, you bet.
So 2 or 3 weeks later, December 11th to be exact, I staggered into the Charlie B. Towns Hospital, that famous drying out emporium on Central Park West, New York City. I'd been there before, so I knew and already loved the doctor in charge, Dr. Silkworth. It was he who was soon to contribute a very great idea without which AA could never have succeeded. For years, he had been proclaiming alcoholism an illness, an obsession of the mind, coupled with an allergy of the body. By now, I knew that meant me. I also understood what a fatal combination these two ogres could be. Of course, I'd once hoped to be among the small percentage of victims who now and then escaped their vengeance. But this outside hope was now gone. I was about to hit bottom. That verdict of science, the obsession that condemned me to drink, and the allergy that condemned me to die, was about to do the trick. That's where medical science personified by this benign little doctor began to fit in. Hold in the hands of one alcoholic talking to the next, these double-edged truths was a sledgehammer which could shatter the tough alcoholic's ego at depth and lay him wide open to the grace of God. I wish this was done more. Do you know when I first heard what alcoholism was, that it was an obsession of the mind coupled with an allergy of the body?
It wasn't when you first. It wasn't when you first walked in the rooms.
No, it was not. No, it was not. They told me I needed to put the plug in the jug, and they told me I needed to keep my memory green, and they told me that they just didn't drink no matter what.
Yeah.
And even if their butt was to fall off. And so all that was confusing. The first time I heard this was when I listened to a set of Joe and Charlie tapes that my friend Radio Shack Mike had lent me. It was really the first time, and I'd been going to meetings for about a year at that point in time, so I didn't know what alcoholism was when I was dying from it. I didn't know what alcoholism was when I was 9 months going to meetings every night. I had to find out what alcoholism was from a set of Joe and Charlie tapes. Now, Bill learned that exact same thing from Dr. Silkworth, and once you know that. Once you know that you can't prevent alcohol from going in your body and you can't control it once it goes in, once you fully concede that to your innermost self, there's only divine help.
Yeah.
There's only divine. Yeah. There's God and there's nothing else.
Yeah, I got to share this. So I was, just flooded with shame and embarrassment, and I'm just the rottenest guy in the world. This is when I decided that something had to change, and I did the thing. I was going to a Al-Anon / AA club downtown, and I was hearing all that stuff too, all the platitudes, and really a lot of stuff that really isn't beneficial to the real alcoholic. But they work pretty good for people who just want to improve their life on a daily basis to some degree. But for me, it wasn't. I didn't make any sense of it, and I ended up in an outpatient program. And the guy, he was a rookie. Later, he became the director and a good friend of mine for years. But this guy was a rookie, and he taught us about the obsession of the mind and the allergy of the body. He taught us the medical side of this thing. And for the first time, after months of thinking I was this horrible person, I realized that I had a medical condition. And that freed me up to actually want to do something about changing and bettering my life because I was worth it. And that was the first time I'd heard of that.
It's also a weight off your shoulders.
Oh, man, yeah.
Because I always thought, for want of a better word, I always thought I was a scumbag.
Yes.
And with weak will, who is just irresponsible and weak and stupid, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what I looked like, with this drinking. But when it's explained that it's an illness and one is powerless over it, that takes a great weight off of one's shoulders. I mean, you recognize you're in a lot of trouble, but that you're not a terrible person doing terrible things. You're a sick person who is doing sick things,
Yeah.
which is easier to tolerate.
You betcha.
So in my case, it was, of course, Dr. Silkworth who swung the sledge while my friend Ebby carried to me the spiritual principles and the grace which brought on my sudden spiritual awakening at the hospital 3 days later. I immediately knew that I was a free man. And with this astonishing experience came a feeling of wonderful certainty that great numbers of alcoholics might one day enjoy the priceless gift which had been bestowed upon me. Now, we've talked about this many times, Monty, but Bill wasn't the first alcoholic to get sober in the Oxford group. He wasn't even the first alcoholic to get sober in the Oxford group to write a book about it. But I believe he was the first alcoholic to get sober in the Oxford group who dedicated the rest of his life to helping other alcoholics get sober.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him a saint in my book. He could have easily said, "Wow, I'm sober now. Back to Wall Street.
Yeah.
I'm going to make my third million." He could have, because probably many people did, who were exposed to the Oxford group and got sober. No, he set all that aside, and he dedicated the rest of his life to helping people like you and me. And I have so much respect for
Yes.
that.
Amen.
At this point, a third stream of influence entered my life through the pages of William James' book, Variety of Religious Experience. Somebody had brought it to my hospital room. I can't imagine reading that book on a hospital bed. Monty, I just reread it last year, and it was rough. And that was like 3 decades into sobriety. I read it. Yeah, and why it's so hard is it's a lecture.
Yeah.
They took a lecture and they just put it into print.
In print.
So it's not like you would be reading a book. It's to be enunciated. It's not to be like read.
Yeah.
So anyway, following my sudden experience, Dr. Silkworth had taken great pains to convince me that I was not hallucinating. But William James did even more. Not only, he said, could spiritual experiences make people saner, they could transform men and women so that they could do, feel, and believe what had hitherto been impossible to them. Wow. It mattered little whether these awakenings were sudden or gradual. Their variety could be almost infinite. But the biggest payoff of that noted book was this. In most of the cases described, those who had been transformed were hopeless people. In some controlling area of their lives, they had met absolute defeat. Well, that was me, all right. In complete defeat with no hope of faith whatever. I had made an appeal to a higher power. I had taken step 1 of today's AA program, admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. I'd also taken step 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Thus I was set free. It was just as simple, yet just as mysterious as that. Wow, what do you think about that, Monty? Step 1 and step 3.
Well, it's really interesting to me. I was a quote-unquote Bible-thumping, born-again believer before I actually ever did steps 1 through 3. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
it was all up here in the head. And I really thought it was in the heart too. I was deceived, Chris. It really had not gotten to my heart. And I'm not sure why. But when this happened, and when I read things like this, I go, yes, amen, I get it. That was exactly me. And I mean, Bill was not a stupid man. Very intelligent man.
Smart.
He was a wordsmith. He had those giftings before he ever got sober. And so for this to happen to him, and him believing that he was at a place where he was hopeless, I'd gotten there too. And one of the things I was going to say was, there are folks, and you've probably read some of the articles in the books, I know I have, that say, okay, well, Bill Wilson's white light experience, he was in a deep depression. He was experimenting with hallucinogenics. He was dabbling here and there, and they try to explain it away, like many try to explain all spiritual experiences away. They try to, make them logical or whatever. What do you say to folks like that?
A lot of times we need to know. A lot of times we need to be able to explain. It needs to be logical. It needs to be like mathematics. 1 and 1 equals 2. And in the spiritual world, it's experiential. Sometimes it's not intellectual.
Yes.
Sometimes you can't quantify it. Sometimes it's just an experience. You know what I mean? So he had understood that he was totally defeated, and asked God for help, and experienced a spiritual awakening. Uh, so, so who are we to say that that's not completely valid? Mine was I cried out to God. I was on my detox bed, Monty. I was laying on the couch detoxing, and I was in like day two of hallucinations and convulsions in the DTS, and I remember crying out to God, God, help me, kill me or get me sober. I can't live like this anymore. You gotta help. And it didn't happen like you would be snapping your fingers, but within a couple of days I was going to AA meetings, and I was starting to think that I might end up being okay. So you can call that whatever you want, but it was admitting defeat, and it was asking God for help, and it was doing what I thought God would want me to do, which was to go to AA.
Yeah.
I think many of us have that same type of experience. It differs in all kinds of ways, but I think both of those things are important.
I had been attending meetings about 14 miles away from here in a little Girl Scout hut, and my sponsor's name was Doug. He took me through steps 1, 2, and 3 immediately. Boom, boom, boom. And then we drove. Well, we didn't do step 3 yet. We drove to a little Oregon covered bridge. Oregon is famous for their covered bridges. They're everywhere. And this is in the middle of nowhere. And I mean, it is pitch black. And he made me hold a Bic lighter and read the 3rd step prayer on my knees, right? And then he had me put it in my own words and say it how I wanted to say it, which was pretty close to that. And now I didn't have, I mean, an orb didn't appear above my head and warm fuzzies
Right.
and all that stuff. But what happened was the reason I knew something had changed in me on the way I approached God, or I should say how he approached me, was when I went back to the meetings, I heard something totally different. I didn't hear the intellectual stuff. I heard people that were hurting, whose lives were changing, and miracles were happening. And I wasn't seeing that before. I was just seeing people going to meetings and because they were going to meetings. I saw through a different set of lenses, and I knew something had changed, and it has given me, ever since that day, it has given me a hunger to know more about this fellowship. That's why I love doing stuff like this with you.
Yeah, yeah. Every day I get to see, miracles. I also get to see some, some tragedies. I got a phone call. I got a phone call this week from a friend of mine. I've known him 17 years. I met this individual. We were both speaking at a conference in Nova Scotia 17 years ago.
Wow.
And you know how you just click with some people.
Sure.
Yeah, you know you're going to be friends with them for the rest of your life the first time you meet them.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what the case was with him. Very, 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 very popular speaker. Probably almost every weekend, he's on a plane going somewhere to speak. He called me up Saturday afternoon, and he said, "Have you heard through the grapevine?" And I go, "No. Heard what?" He goes, "I drank." And I'm like, what? And now, if you would have given me 10 people I think would never drink again, he would have been in that 10.
Uh-huh.
So not only do you see incredible, wonderful things, but you see setbacks. You see what can happen to us, because this is an illness. Rarely have we seen a person fail, and every once in a while, a really good AA will pick up. An AA who's doing everything will pick up, and I've seen that a couple of times. It's very rare, but I'll tell you what. I see more miracles
Yes.
than anything else. I see more positive change in people's life than anything else. And I've got to be, I've had the opportunity to be involved in a lot of these situations, as have you.
Yeah.
And here, here's the thing: it's not our message. We're carrying a message, and that message has depth and weight, and it can be transformational, but it's not our message. So we need to not get egotistical about it,
Sure.
or start to take ownership of, I got him sober, or something like
Right.
that. But
Right.
I'm kind of rambling here, but I will tell you that, I've seen this transformation occur so many times that, I at depth, I know that this is possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
This transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, my sponsor used to say, this is the most marvelous thing that's ever happened to me. I chase after it like a diamond ring instead of an old shoe. And he goes, it's the most wonderful thing that's ever happened in my life. You don't want to miss it.
Oh, heck no, absolutely.
Yeah.
So these realizations were so exciting that I instantly joined up with the Oxford groups. But to their consternation, I insisted on devoting myself exclusively to drunks. This was disturbing to the Oxford groups on two counts. Firstly, they wanted to help save the whole world. Secondly, their luck with drunks had been poor. Just as I had joined, they had been working over a batch of alcoholics who had proved disappointing indeed. One of them, it was rumored, had flippantly cast his shoe through a valuable stained glass window of an Episcopal church across the alley from the Oxford Group headquarters. Neither did they take kindly to my repeated declaration that it shouldn't take long to sober up all the drunks in the world. They rightly declared that my conceit was still immense. so we knew that Bill separated from the Oxford
Yes.
Group, somewhere before 1939, when the book was published, right?
Yeah.
He's giving us a little bit of information why that happened. The Oxford Group people had their shoes puked on, one too many times, and kind of asked Bill to take it down the road,
Poor Bill.
Yeah. Let's do one more paragraph, Monty, and then we'll save the rest for next week.
Okay, good deal.
Okay, after some 6 months of violent exertion with scores of alcoholics, which I found at a nearby mission and Towns Hospital, it began to look like the groupers were right. I hadn't sobered up anybody. In Brooklyn, we always had a house full of drunks living with us, sometimes as many as 5. My valiant wife, Lois, once arrived home from work to find one of them fairly tight. The remaining 2 were worse. They were wailing on each other with 2x4s. That'll get your attention. Though events like these slowed me down somewhat, the persistent conviction that a way to sobriety could be found never seemed to leave me. There was, though, one bright spot. My sponsor, Ebby, still clung precariously to his newfound sobriety. Now, he's saying precariously, Monty, because we know that Ebby, became a relapser. He did end up dying sober after getting sent down to Texas. But he did struggle. And listen, a lot of the early AAs struggled. A lot of the AAs today struggle.
Yeah, you bet.
We're not claiming we're 100% successful for everybody that walks through the door. But there are heartening examples of success. You've experienced them, and I've experienced them.
Yeah. I got to say, you said something last week. You've said it a couple of times on this series about psychiatrists, psychologists, and doctors and so forth. When it comes down to it, they kind of close their books and go, listen, AA is what works, right? And that they are very, very much in favor of that, almost over their own stuff. And I was sharing that with somebody the other day, and they reminded me of an organization which I will not name on this show that I worked for a while that claimed a 95% success rate. Now, I've heard that for years from this organization, and I have to tell you, I don't believe it. And one of the reasons I don't believe it is because I found out later it's kind of like 4 out of 5 dentists surveyed recommend Crest for their patients who, use toothpaste, right? Well, they just means they interviewed 5 people and 4 of them liked Crest. It doesn't mean 4 out of 5 people on the planet, So having said that, just for kicks, what do you think about people that claim these high success rates? I mean, I guess anything is possible, but I don't even know that we don't have success rates like that in AA.
So I'm intimately familiar with the history of outcome measurements in addictive illness and alcoholism treatment. Okay.
Yeah.
Norm Hoffman was one of the guys who first, came up with an outcome measurement tool. Dr. Bob Lynn is someone who understands how necessary and how valuable true outcome studies are. The problem is they're near impossible to measure in this particular population. So some people will call you up once a month for a year. Hey, how you doing? Yeah. Now that's not exact science, right?
No.
Really, to be able to have provable outcome data like the heart surgeons and the cancer doctors have, you have to be continually monitoring somebody, blood tests, checkups, all kinds of things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's another characteristic that we have that skews that data, and that's dishonesty. We'll tell people we're sober when we're not.
Right.
We won't be honest with, have you drank in the past 6 months? We won't be honest with you. If you're a doctor asking us. This outcome, like a treatment center claiming, this kind of an outcome. It's based on very, very imperfect data. I'm not saying that they're lying or they're trying to be deceitful. They've just got bad tools for the measurement of outcomes. They all do. And so what you can do is you can take a percentage of people that show up to the alumni picnic every year. Okay, you've treated 500 people and 30 of them show up to the alumni picnic.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can't do better than that. And again, it's not science. No one should hang their hat on it.
Right. Well, I tell you what, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the principles within the pages of that book, and the power of God guiding it all, I'm totally 100% convinced on that. And there's that. We'll just put that to rest. All right.
Yeah, me too.
All right, everybody. Listen, you can go back and replay this show. Of course, you can download this for fun and for free. Next week, we'll go into part 2 of Fragment of History, Origin of the 12 Steps, from the book, The Language of the Heart. Grapevine articles from 1944 to 1970 by Bill W. All right, Chris, thank you so much, my friend, for another excellent show. Everybody, until our next broadcast, this is the Monty'man along with Chris S., and we're wishing God's perfect serenity for you. For more recovery workshops with Chris S. and the Monty'man, visit our website at take12radio.com and click on the Recovery Workshops banner.
This has been a broadcast of Take 12 Recovery Radio and KHLT Recovery Broadcasting.
This has been a Chicken and a Pig production.
Kitty, 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 kitty. Meow, meow, meow.
Woof, woof.